Okay, so we're back with introductory microeconomics, talking about another one of our foundational topics, the determinants of demand. Basically, just going through the logic, the intuition of how different factors would cause the demand for a given product to shift left or right, increasing or decreasing. So, as we've seen, a shift in demand can be thought of as having two equally correct interpretations, both of which will definitely inform our interpretation of different causes of a shift in demand. So we can think about a change in the consumer's willingness to pay for each unit. So that's the up-down vertical shift of a demand curve, a change in the dollar value on that price axis, right? We think of that as the marginal benefit, the willingness to pay in dollar terms for each unit. If anything causes that to change on average or for a given consumer, the position of that curve, that demand line, is going to change as well. And we can also think about a demand shift as representing, right, the horizontal movement, a change in quantity demanded that occurs at each price level. So again, from a consumer's point of view, if anything that makes you want to buy more units, even though the price hasn't changed, that will be reflected in our model as a shift in demand, a movement of that entire price quantity demand relationship. Okay, so again, all we want to do here is kind of go through a list of the possible factors, I should say of some possible factors that will shift the demand curve for a particular good or service. There's a much longer list of all the things that could possibly affect the position of the demand curve. We're going to go through the ones that are most commonly seen. Okay. And then, of course, what this is going to allow us to do is to make predictions about how economic events or trends will affect the position of the demand for given products. And clearly, that's going to be important information, not only from an economic analysis standpoint, but from a supplier, from a business standpoint, right? If you're producing a product, you need to be able to not only kind of locate where your demand is at a given point in time, how many units you'll be able to sell at a given price, but be able to make predictions, right, of how sensitive that demand curve is going to be to different changes in the economy, in the market, in the industry. In anything that might be affecting it, we want to be able to make those predictions. So what we'll list as number one here is, again, kind of a fairly obvious thing, consumer income. And of course, we would think, well, as consumer income goes up, they're going to be buying more units of any given product. Quantity demanded will increase at every price, and demand is going to increase. And right, that's what we would expect to see. If you have more money in your pocket, you're going to be willing to pay more, willing and able to pay more for all units, shifting that curve upward. And you're going to tend to buy more units. Quantity demanded is going to increase at all price levels. And that is usually the case. So when we have this situation where there's a positive correlation between consumer income and quantity demanded, they move in the same direction. More money, you buy more stuff. Less money, you buy less stuff. That's simply what we refer to as a normal good. Okay. And as the name implies, that's the typical scenario. But we will definitely see a negative correlation between income and consumption, income and the position of the demand curve for other types of goods, which we'll refer to as inferior goods. And again, the definition simply is an inverse or negative correlation between income and consumption. And again, the name pretty much gives it away. If consumers determine a good to be inferior, that means as income rises, you are going to substitute away from that good to a good that is deemed to have higher quality, a higher quality alternative. So this is obviously going to be a subjective measure. So every consumer is going to have different products that they might list as being inferior for them, but things that come up kind of on average as examples, something like frozen pizza. It's cheap, it's convenient, but if your income doubled, you would probably find alternative sources of nutrition. right? Instead of buying canned vegetables, you would have fresh vegetables. Instead of rental housing, if your income rose high enough, you would buy a house, again, on average. So as income rises, the demand for each of these products will be shifting to the left. And again, thinking about why this information is important, if you are a producer, you need to know, right, which category your particular product is in so you can predict how the demand for your product will react to economic conditions, i.e., when we're in a recessionary period and income's falling, are people going to buy less of your product or more? When the economy is expanding, income's going up on average, how are consumers going to react? So we can think of these reactions as being either pro-cyclical, moving with the cycle. So as the economy improves, the demand for your product will improve as well. The economy as a whole is doing poorly, incomes fall, and demand for your product will fall. That's what we expect for normal goods. So the upside of producing a product that's deemed to be an inferior good is that the demand for your product and therefore the performance of your firm will be counter-cyclical. When the economy is doing poorly, we're in a recession, incomes are falling, everybody else is doing poorly, they're going to substitute towards your good because they can't afford the higher quality, and demand for your product will actually rise. So for an example, we have two goods, X and Y. So we have a demand curve for X here on the left, price of X versus quantity demanded, price of Y versus quantity demanded on the right. And let's imagine that X is a normal good and Y is an inferior good. And the first thing to notice from a midterm exam scenario standpoint is that if I just showed you these two plots, X on the left, Y on the right, of course, there's no way that you could tell based on just how the graphs are drawn, which is normal and which is inferior. They both follow the law of demand, right? Meaning as price goes up, quantity demanded falls and vice versa. They both have a downward sloping demand curve. The only way that you could tell one was normal and the other was inferior is if you had information of how they react following a change in income, which is what we'll see here. So follow up here, once we have it set up, what will happen when the economy goes into a recession and average incomes fall? So the good on the left being a normal good, it's going to be pro-cyclical. It's going to go in the same direction as the economy as a whole, the same direction as income. So in this case, the economy is doing poorly, income falls, the demand for that product is going to shift to the left. So again, willingness to pay comes down, quantity demanded comes down, right? So shifting down and to the left, a decrease in demand. Good Y being an inferior good, incomes come down, people are going to substitute towards that product, and demand is going to shift to the right, increasing quantity, increasing willingness to pay, the counter-cyclical outcome. So again, be able to work through kind of examples like this, be able to take a news article delineating a change in income or a change in the state of the economy and make predictions about how demand curves for different types of products are going to react. Okay. So number 2 on our list of demand determinants, this one also fairly straightforward, the number of consumers in the market. We could also kind of say the number and composition of consumers in the market, kind of the demographic composition of that customer base. But in terms of just the raw numbers, remember how we defined a market demand curve? It was the relationship between the price of a product and the sum of all of the quantity demanded values across all consumers. Technically would be written like this, right? So QDI would be the quantity demanded for just a single consumer, consumer I, but there are N of them, right? So N represents the total number of consumers. So the number of units that would be sold for any given price level would be that market quantity demanded, the sum across in demands. So naturally, as in rises, we're adding additional consumers to the calculation, and the total units demanded will be increasing. The demand curve would be shifting to the right. Likewise, as a region would be depopulated, if in is decreasing, that demand curve would shift to the left. And the note about demographics, the point simply was, we're not just tracking, the population of an economy or the population of a region. If you are selling a product to a particular demographic, say males 18 to 30, and that particular demographic is seeing a decrease in numbers as employment situations change, people in that age range are moving out, your in might be decreasing, the number of consumers for your product, even if the total population is stable or even increasing. Okay, so the point is, in is a product specific parameter, right? The number of consumers for your product, generally correlated with overall population. But again, think about it as an industry or even a product specific value. So that one's pretty straightforward. Another one, also pretty straightforward, consumer tastes and preferences. So again, demand is measuring how much happiness, right? How much utility we are gaining or we expect to gain from the consumption of a particular product. That is a very subjective measure and can be somewhat fickle, can be changing over time. So just keep that in mind, that our willingness to pay is a subjective measure of our benefits, our happiness, our utility. And as consumers change their view on what will give them happiness or how much happiness they would get from a particular product, well, the demand for that product will shift accordingly. The obvious story here would be, fashion trends in clothing, they change every year. So last year, everybody was wearing bell bottoms. This year, everybody's wearing something else. So the demands change with the seasons, with tastes, and what's in style, right? But of course, every product is going to have, some degree of, it's going to be affected to some degree by this determinant. And when you think about what firms are trying to do with a lot of marketing and advertising expenditure, is to adjust consumers' tastes and preferences towards their product, to influence them to think that they're going to get that extra cachet or that extra happiness or utility from their product. So it's not just, something that changes randomly over time. It's something that can be influenced by firms, hence influencers, right? But in terms of analysis, right, we're not going to do much in terms of, applying a numerical value to measuring tastes and preferences. Just recognize it as one of the determinants of the position of a demand curve. Another real important category here is consumers' expectations, right? So of course, we react to what's actually happening, how much money is in our pocket and how much we have to pay for a product, but we are also always making forward-looking calculations. So one thing we're always trying to figure out is not only how much money am I making right now, but how much money am I going to be earning? What's going to be my wealth level 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? And we might change our current consumption decisions based on that expectation, based on that forecast. And on average, consumers tend to react to a change in their expectation the same way they react to a change in reality, right? So if you expect to have higher wealth in the future, you expect your income to rise, you're going to be likely to be spending more. It's going to be acting as if you already have that money, okay? So we can think of consumer confidence, right? Measures of, the probability that I'm going to be employed 6 months from now. If my forecast of that probability is decreasing, right? If there's a lot of layoffs in the company, in the industry that I'm working in, It's like, it's a 50-50 chance I might be unemployed in 6 months. Well, your expectation of your future income falls, and you're going to act accordingly. You're going to save more and spend less. You're going to act as if you've already lost that income, and vice versa. If things are looking good, high probability of a higher income in the future, you're probably going to feel more comfortable spending more now. And the demand for a normal good is going to shift to the right. Okay. So our normal versus inferior delineation still holds, right? If you expect to have higher income later, you're probably going to consume less of fewer units of an inferior good. You'll already make that transition to higher quality based on your expectation. So one of the economic data points that gains a lot of attention is the consumer confidence survey that comes out every month. So basically, households are asked these types of questions, right? Where do you see the economy being in 6 months, in 12 months? And we pay attention to it not because we think households actually know what's going to happen, right? We don't actually believe their forecast, but we believe that they act on those forecasts, right? So if the average consumer confidence index is coming down, that means people are probably going to pull back on their spending, and we can make forecasts based on that. So another forward-looking demand determinant is our expectations on future prices. And again, we've all been there as a consumer. We react both to the actual number on the price tag, right? So a change in the current price, if that goes up, we buy less. If that goes down, we buy more, right? That's our law of demand, yet again, a movement along a demand curve. But we also take into account our forecast. Do we believe the price of the product we're considering buying is going to stay constant, rise, or fall? And that can lead into a change in our current behavior. So if, for example, the price of a product is expected to fall in the future, you have some credible information to say, whatever, this automobile is going to be $2,000 cheaper in 3 months. Well, what are you going to do? You're not going to buy it now. You're going to wait. Your consumption is going to fall. Demand is going to fall now in reaction to that expectation. Whether you turn out to be correct or not is really irrelevant. You're reacting just to the expectation. And you see this all the time, right? That especially if you're buying a car, right? They'll always say, yeah, we'll sell you this car for $20,000, but I don't know how long this price is going to last. If you come back in a month, it might be $5,000 higher. So you're like, oh, wow, if the price is going to rise in the future, I better buy it now. And your demand shifts based on that expectation. Now, it's obviously in equity and commodity trading, right? Expectations are, account for 90% of the volatility in demand. So it's all about buy low and sell high. Right? I hope you're writing this down. It's valuable guidance here. But that's all we're saying, right? So it's not just saying, oh, I want to buy the product that gives me the best deal. I want to buy the product at the time period where I get the best deal. Okay. So two big ones here. Number 6 on our list of things that might shift the demand curve, price of substitute goods. So we kind of have an idea, right, what this means. So if two goods, X and Y, are deemed to be substitutes in consumption, technically all that means is, from the consumer's point of view, they play a similar role in providing utility. They provide similar levels and similar types of benefit or happiness or utility. So if either X or Y will provide the same benefit, you don't need to consume both simultaneously, right? So the availability or the price of one will affect our desire to purchase the other, and therefore cause a change in the position of that demand curve. So any number of examples jump to mind, most of them food and beverage related, right? So you consume coffee or tea. Rarely do you consume both at the same time, right? You drive an electric vehicle or an internal combustion vehicle. Rarely do you have both, right, simultaneously. You're going to buy one or the other, and therefore they would be deemed substitutes. Right? So what this is going to set into motion, right, is that, kind of a chain reaction, a little domino effect, where a change in the price of one product can affect many others if they are deemed substitutes or competitors from the consumer's point of view. So a change in the price of one good will impact your demand, a shift of the demand curve for the other. So think about the automobile market, right? As electric vehicles become less expensive, their prices are falling. Consumers purchase more. So picture that movement down along the demand curve, following the law of demand. And therefore, they purchase fewer standard internal combustion engine vehicles. The entire demand curve shifts for that substitute, right? We're not reacting to a change in the price of internal combustion engine vehicles. We're reacting to a change in the desire for that product as the alternative, as the substitute becomes cheaper. Okay. So you need to know not only the demand for your product, but how it relates to, again, products that are deemed competitors or substitutes by consumers. One thing we'll look at next chapter is how to measure that sensitivity, right? How a change in the price of one product might affect the demand for your product. There's a numerical value we can attach to that, which is clearly going to be very important, a data point that you're going to want to know if you are the producer of a product. So to sketch out that whole situation, let's imagine the beginning point here is a decrease in the price for electric vehicles. So that's the demand curve on the left here. How is that going to affect the demand for the substitute, the internal combustion engine, the gasoline engine vehicle? So if we start at point 1 here, price level P1, quantity demanded QD1 of electric vehicles, something causes the price to fall. We see consumers moving along that EV demand curve. So price falls, increase quantity demanded. And for every electric vehicle that's purchased, there's going to be, right, an internal combustion gasoline engine vehicle that someone's not going to need to buy. So that entire demand curve shifts to the left. So again, very important to make that distinction, the movement along versus the shift. On the left, we're reacting to a change in price. So it's a movement along. On the right-hand side diagram, we're reacting to something else, decrease in consumption at all price levels. So it's going to shift that entire curve. Okay. And lastly, if two goods can be substitutes, you need either one or the other. The other key relationship amongst products is going to be a complementary relationship, where the consumption of one actually raises the benefit of consuming the other. Two goods that are generally consumed simultaneously are going to be complementary goods. So here, again, any number of examples. So to run your internal combustion engine, you need gasoline. You can't have one without the other. You consume them simultaneously. One gives extra benefit to consuming the other. Those are going to be complements. When you have a cup of coffee, you also want a donut. When you have a donut, you also want a cup of coffee to go along with it. The simultaneous consumption, right, raises the benefit to both. If you want to have streaming services, if you subscribe to Hulu, well, you're also going to need internet access, right? Consumed together, complementary products. So again, there's going to be this domino effect, this ripple effect from the price, a change in price of any one product. So if X and Y are complements, and say the price of good X goes up, law of demand says you buy less X, but you buy X and Y together. So if you're buying less X, you're going to decrease your consumption of Y. But since you're not reacting to a price change of Y, you're consuming less at every price level. We would say that's a shift of the demand. So it's, again, a movement along one demand curve, X, and a shift of the other, Y. but here they're moving in the same direction. Quantities go together for complementary goods. There are examples that we would call extreme cases of complementarity when we have perfect complements, when they're actually consumed at a constant ratio. Kind of the silly, trivial example would be a left shoe and a right shoe, right? If Foot Locker ever decided to sell them separately, you would always buy one with the other. Hot dogs and buns, right? Whatever the case might be. But you don't have to have that extreme case to have the same effect, right? As long as consumption of one good raises the benefits to consuming the other, you're going to tend to have the same directional effect. So to plot this one out, let's do the same thing with automobiles here, but now it's going to be two complementary goods, so gasoline and internal combustion engine vehicles. Clearly, we can make the case that those are going to be complements to one another. And let's imagine now that we have, there we go, starting at point 1 and moving up to point 2, we have an increase in the price of gasoline. So law of demand says we're going to buy less, so we're going to move up that demand curve. But if you're buying less gas, you're going to be less likely to buy a new vehicle, and the whole demand curve for internal combustion engine vehicles is going to shift to the left. And there finally is point 2, right? So once again, for exam preparation purposes, right, be able to think through an example like this. So if you're given, okay, the price of gasoline goes up, what would be a substitute for that product? What would be a complement to that product? Be able to sketch out the reactions, okay, and kind of explain the intuition. So again, there are other possible scenarios that would cause a change in demand. These are the big ones that we're going to want to focus on. So to summarize all of this, if you see something like this, a demand curve for a product shifting to the right, have a little laundry list of things that could explain it, right? So why would we be buying more of product Y, whatever that might be? Well, it could be an increase in income or wealth if we're looking at a normal good. It could be a decrease in income or wealth if product Y is an inferior good. We could be looking at an increase in the number of consumers in that market, a shift in taste and preferences toward this product, an increase in expected income, again, assuming a normal good, an increase in the expected price. You don't want to wait and buy it at a higher price. You want to buy it now. So your current demand shifts to the right. If we saw an increase in the price of a substitute, you'd buy less of the substitute, more of this good. So the demand would shift to the right, or a decrease in the price of a complement. You buy more of the complement, and the complement goes together with good Y. So you're going to buy more of good Y as well. So again, just kind of practice that scenario. And this is also a good source of potential current event discussions, right? So be on the lookout in the newspaper and magazines of, a story about an increase or a decrease in the demand for a product that you can sketch out like this and explain using one or more of our determinants. So next up, we will set up and discuss the supply curve and then put them together and talk about market equilibrium. All right, thanks.